Hi, this video is part of my complete Docker and Kubernetes course. The link is in the description of the video, so make sure to give a thumbs up, and if you don't want to miss any updates, subscribe to the channel. That being said, let's get started. Hello and welcome back. The bulk of both the Notes backend and the Notebooks backend functionality is already implemented, but there is still something missing, and this is actually allowing the user to save or to link a certain note to a notebook. In this lecture, I would like to explore this concept with you by adopting a very simple approach. So this is one of the simplest approaches. It's just going to communicate from the Notes backend with the Notebooks backend synchronously, and it's going to send a request to check whether the provided notebook ID actually returns a notebook for us. We could tackle this in many different ways. Inter-service communication here in distributed systems, which is really what we have here. We have one service for Notes backend and one service for Notebooks backend, and they need to talk to each other. There are many ways we can approach this, and I will keep it to the simplest form, which is just an API, synchronous API call from the Notes backend to the Notebooks backend. For us to be able to execute this call, we need to install a dependency here. Let's stop our service, and then let's change into the Notes backend, and let's install here, save exec as well, the Axios dependency. It's going to be Axios at version 1.7.2. If you prefer to use another client, for example, the fetch library, then by all means go ahead. You will just need to write the code following the standards and the conventions of the library you use. I'm going to use Axios here. So let's now come back to our root directory. Let's then run docker compose up --build watch here. And this should rebuild our notes container so that the Axios dependency is now available. Back at the IDE, let's scroll up here and let's then import Axios. So const Axios is equal to require Axios. And now we can use this to perform an HTTP request to our Notebooks backend. Let's scroll down here. Now let's extract our notebook ID from the request body. We will start allowing for users to provide notebook IDs. And remember, we are already provisioning a field notebook ID in our schema. So we can just start saving this field here as well when we create a new note. Let's just confirm that everything is working as expected here. I will wrap the Axios API call around a try-catch statement here, because Axios will throw an error in case the notebook ID is not found. If we make an HTTP request and that request returns a 404, for Axios this will actually raise an error. So I just want to catch this error here immediately and continue with the processing of my request instead of entering here in our outer catch block. So let's just run here. We're going to say await axios.get. And the URL here, let's use our reverse proxy, http://. In our compose file, the name here is reverse proxy. Let's copy this, let's paste it here. Reverse proxy, it is listening on port 80, so we don't need to specify the port here. We're going to say /API/notebooks. And now here we need to pass backticks because we would like to interpolate the notebook ID. So just going to say here notebook ID like so. And then here, if we get any errors, let's just console.error the error that we get. Let's not make any other changes here. Let's not use our notebook ID later down the road. I just want to inspect whether this communication to our notebooks backend is working as expected. Before we actually test this in Postman, let's just wrap this around an if condition here that checks whether the notebook ID field is defined. It doesn't make sense for us to issue this API call if we do not have a notebook ID provided. Now back in Postman, we can then send a post request. Let's say here, we're just going to call this my note once again. So we're going to start duplicating some notes. Let's send this and let's confirm that this works as expected. Let's now provide a notebook ID here, notebook ID, and this will just be, let's say, 123. And the moment we send this request, We get the result back here because remember we are catching the error from Axios. But if we jump to our logs, we will actually see that we are printing here the response that we got back from our API. So if we scroll up a little bit here, we will see bad request. And if we scroll down a little bit, we have information about the request. We have the URL that we were hitting when we send the GET request, and a little bit more here at the bottom. We're going to get eventually the response. Here is the response, here is the status of the response, and here is the status text. So it just says not found, and then at the very, very bottom here we have data, error, notebook not found. This is amazing. So we were just able to communicate from the nodes backend to the notebooks backend via our reverse proxy. The reverse proxy, however, is not the only host that we can use to reach out to our notebooks API. Remember, if we open our compose override, we have the notebooks and the nodes service in the same network. That means that we could potentially use also our notebooks here, the notebooks, the name of the service, and Docker will work as expected. It will be able to resolve this because they are in the same network. Let's then save this and come back to Postman to give it a try. If we send this request once again, then we can see that we get a response back. And switching to the logs and scrolling up a little bit, we will also see that we get the same response from our notebook service. Before we move any further, let's extract this to an environment variable. So let's just copy and remove this here, and we will add a variable here. We're just going to call this notebooks API URL. And then we're going to define this at the top here. We're going to say const notebooks API URL is equal to process.env.notebooks underscore API underscore URL. Let's then come in our compose.override here, because we can then also add another environment key. So let's add here environment key, and then we can pass our notebooks API URL. And we can set this at the moment for just HTTP notebooks API notebooks. We can also use the reverse proxy if we wish to use it here, but really for us this doesn't matter. So let's just save this here and confirm that we are retrieving this here. That's correct. So the name of the variable is the same, and then we are using the notebooks API URL. In our terminal, let's stop the running containers. Let's wait for everything to stop. Let's take our Docker Compose project down here, and then let's bring this up again with the build and the watch flags. This should be a very quick operation since everything is already cached in Docker. Great, so we are back up and running, just a couple of seconds. And in Postman here we can confirm that things are still working by just sending 1 or 2 post requests to our nodes endpoint.